There he is, my man, Esteban Carrillo, coming on at the last minute for me. Thank you, my man. I really appreciate it. Um, and just so people know, Esteban Carrillo, he's Ecuadorian journalist, currently writing for The Cradle. Previously with Telesur English. Esteban, man, how you doing this morning? I'm sorry for the delay. I
It's okay,
had
Jamal.
a
It's all
bad
good.
experience once where I cut somebody off. I think it was Kofi. And the audience was like, "Oh, boo on you, man! How dare you cut him off in that way?" It's like, okay, okay, okay. You have to let
No, no,
people
it's
finish
all
their
good. I'm doing good.
statement.
I'm doing good. It's always good to join you, and good morning to everyone who's joining us, or whatever time zone you are in.
I'm glad you could join me, man. There is one of the wild things. I'm sweating here. I forgot to cut the AC on. Um, and I'm not in the states. One of the wild things that have taken place has to do with, once again, as I pointed out, Israel was going to back out of the deal.
Mhm.
Everybody in the media, for whatever reason, was acting as if, hey, we have a deal between Hamas and the U.S. And I said that deal is nonsense. It makes no sense. It's completely contradictory in terms, considering Israel is building camps to put people in. Trump is on board for them
Yes.
being put in camps with the idea of either killing them or getting them out of the country.
Uh-huh.
So the idea that you're signing a deal that claims that Israel is going to leave Gaza seems to be nonsense. Okay, fast forward a couple of days later, you
Hmm.
get the reporting that Israel put a poison pill in the deal,
Hmm.
and it effectively changed the context of the deal. So what would most likely happen is, okay, we'll exchange hostages, so we'll get all our people back, we'll reload, and then we'll go back on a killing spree,
Hmm.
which is what Netanyahu effectively wants,
Hmm.
and what Trump wants, considering Trump helped set up those pins
Yes.
all throughout Gaza. All right. One of the wild parts of that is reporting by the Gray Zone and by the Cradle, for that matter. You guys have been Johnny on the spot on this. In fact, I saw it on the Cradle before I saw it anywhere else. But there is a shadowy organization with the initials GHF. And people were like, what the hell is that?
Hmm.
Now, people could see Hebrew writing on some of the boxes. So they figured, okay, well, obviously Israel is supplying the food. What kind of boondoggle is this? You get rid of humanitarian organizations, and then you support your own businesses by feeding starving people that you helped starve in the first place. That is grotesque.
Hmm.
But as the article points out, this group is funded by Mossad and the Israeli government.
Yes.
Go into this for, I mean, the guy's, all black, like he's, incognito. Go into this for me, because I don't know if the audience even knows exactly what we're talking about on this.
So this is just the way we need to understand the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Is such a magnanimous name. How can anybody
Mhm.
speak ill about such a something with such a good name? It's this shady organization created by the U.S. in they established it both in Delaware and in Switzerland. Uh, that is essentially a substitution for the actual, paths and the systems in place to deliver aid to Gaza. And the clearest way to understand what the GHF is simply remember the peer. Remember Joe Biden's peer from last year, the Gaza aid peer, that at the end
I
of the
remember
day,
that.
yeah,
They spent
after
what, $3 million and the thing fell apart in like a month.
more like way more like tens of millions of dollars, because remember
Yeah.
it kept being dismantled, it kept being washed away. There was like from the beginning every single humanitarian agency said this is crap, this is not going to work, this is going to promote the displacement and is going to just continue to spread famine. How did the US sell the peer? They sold it as the humanitarian aid peer that is finally going to let aid into Gaza, although everybody knew that it was also meant to displace Palestinians. It was supposed to open up a path to start removing Palestinians from there. At the end of the day, what did the Gaza aid peer achieve? It In about 3 or so months of operation, it got 1 day's worth of food into Gaza. One
Yeah.
day's worth of food. Dozens of U.S. soldiers injured. At least one died, according to our Reuters. I think it was Reuters or New York Times report from a couple of weeks ago that finally started, giving more information about that whole debacle, that whole fiasco. And infamously, the Gaza aid peer was used to launch an attack and a raid of the Nuseirat refugee camp. Remember when the Israeli army killed about 300 Palestinians to rescue, I think, 6 captives, right? And this was launched from the pier with the help of the United States. Okay, so remember that. Remember the pier. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is just simply a reformulation of the same idea. Let Israel, with the support of the United States, control the humanitarian aid that is going into Gaza. Mind you, today the UN says 100% of the population of Gaza is at risk of famine. There is no food in Gaza. The only food they've been able to get in is flour, and there's no way to cook the flour. So the GHF starts operation on Monday, right? After the CEO, Jay Wood, this former U.S. Marine, resigns. GHF also established by a gentleman who was in charge of training the Contras in Nicaragua, of training these paramilitary death squads. Who was in charge of the he was there, I should say, for the invasion of Kabul. He was there for the Iraq War. It's already, it shows you from the establishment of this organization, aka an NGO, that is run by the former CEO of MasterCard and like some officials from the World Food Kitchen. What it is this. It's just this Gaza Aid Pier 2.0. What is being described to is as aid ghettos, right? As these concentration camps in the south of Gaza, where Palestinians need to move, walk for kilometers to go to these distribution sites that are being controlled by Egyptian and U.S. mercenaries, that they are the ones handing out these meal kits that nobody knows who's paying for them, although I'm pretty sure it's the Gulf. Me personally, is the Gulf that is giving this money through, some probably Israeli companies, because just before it opened its gates, the GHF, Haaretz had this report in which they talked to suppliers who were in the bidding process. The first thing they said was nobody can supply the amount of food that is needed in such short notice. Nobody can. It's too much. Second of all, they talk about the cost of it. So you're talking about $500 million, that this bidding process, whoever wins this is going to be looking at a pretty good a day at the bank, right? Like it's a lot of money. So regardless of anything, the CEO quits on Sunday, says, I cannot be part of this because it doesn't respect any humanitarian principles. There's no way that this scheme can provide the aid that is needed in the way that is needed, right? Because humanitarian aid you cannot pick and choose who you give food to in a war zone. You cannot pick and choose where you give food. The UN has hundreds of sites across Gaza through, and of course that using all of the entry points to Gaza, the ground entry points, they could get the thousands of trucks that have been sitting outside of Gaza for months with food rotting in warehouses from the WFP, because Israel simply does not want to lift its blockade, because the Israeli project calls for the mass starvation of the Palestinian population. This is not a glitch in the system. It is feature. It is main feature. So this is also where the GHF comes in. On the one hand, it allows to pursue the forced displacement of Palestinians, right? Move them all to this tiny area in the south where they will get, allegedly this humanitarian aid from these mercenaries under the control of the Israeli army. Over the past week, every time that you've seen Palestinians go to get aid, you hear the reports that many are being killed, they're being shot to death. The Israelis are just opening fire on the crowds. If they're not opening fire on them, they are kidnapping them, they are taking them. This is a scheme to, to trap anybody they consider to be a Hamas fighter, right? So again, where is the humanitarian principle in any of these? And then the first couple of days of operations, they had to shut down because the Israelis started opening fire on the Palestinians, creating chaos. But this is not how it's portrayed in the media, right? It is portrayed as at most as a controversial, system that is seeking to help the starving Palestinians. But who's starving the Palestinians, right? Why don't they have any food? What's happening, right? Why don't you talk about that? And why don't you say that the GHF, it's simply a continuation of the Gaza aid pier, the military pier in Gaza that Joe Biden established to help Israel maintain control of the humanitarian aid that flows into Gaza in order to use starvation as a weapon of war.
Yeah, Jethro, he's pointing out that they tossed a stun grenade in the middle of a crowd of starving people, which is, again, if you allow hateful, racist, fascists It's like, how did the Nazis see the Jews, right?
I
It's
mean,
the
the
same
images are
thing.
exactly the same. The images from
Yeah,
the GHF, what do you call them? Pens. They're the same as the ones you saw in Poland. They're
yeah,
exactly the same. The only difference is they're in color.
yeah. And the world is aware of it. That's the only difference. I mean, when the Soviets released the first concentration camp, the world was aghast by, oh my God, I can't believe this is what the Germans have been doing. Okay, but we've been watching this day in and day out on social media for years. And this notion of never again wasn't supposed to apply just to Jews. It was supposed to apply to just humanity in general.
Mhm.
That's why they had the Nuremberg trials. And that's why it wasn't just the Jews during the Nuremberg trials, it was the world during the Nuremberg trials saying, we are never going to let this happen again. But you get a group of people who the world apparently finds to be disposable. And by the world, specifically, we're talking about Europe. Um, and there's a patch of land that they want. And so Europe turns a blind eye. They pretend to distance themselves for the last 30 seconds. And the US effectively funds the genocide. And the next step of that is, okay, we have an administration that is now on board for the full takeover of Gaza. How do we do it? Oh, I know. Let's starve the population, force the population into concentration camps. And then we can use their own infirmities, basically their own physical needs, as a way of trying to either kill, exterminate, or get them out of that area so Israel can take everything. It is grotesque. I
It,
mean, it
it
really is. And this
exactly. And it
boondoggle
just
of a program. I mean, please.
you remind me of something that you know Daniela Weiss, right? The settler leader, this lunatic in the West Bank, that said a few weeks ago, that if we don't give them food, they'll leave. Right? Like that's the mentality. If we don't give them food, if we starve them, they're gonna leave. If we blow up their houses, they're gonna leave. That's the
Right,
plan, right? This is the plan. It's not the like I said, it's not a glitch. It's actually what's
right.
meant to do.
And see, that's the most frustrating thing about media, the US media in Europe in general, because they would say, well, we don't understand why Netanyahu doesn't end the war. It's like, what do you mean you don't understand why he doesn't end the war? It's obvious. Like, if you are blowing up hospitals and you're blowing up schools and you're setting kids on fire and you're blowing up UN buildings and you're shooting at UN, meaning
For a
you are
year and a
destroying
half. For a
for a
year and a
year and a
half.
half. You're doing it so people can't come back. That's the entire point. And they're acting like it's such a weird thing that they just keep the war going. Witkoff said that nonsense. He was like, yeah, Netanyahu doesn't have any clear objectives, but the war keeps going on. He has clear objectives. He
It's very
tells you what his
clear.
objectives are.
And
I,
actually,
I-
to go into what you said at the beginning, which is the terms of the ceasefire, right, that was proposed to Hamas.
yep,
What it was, it's essentially, it doesn't call for an end to the war. It doesn't call for the withdrawal of U.S. troops. It maintains Israeli control over the aid mechanism. So, what exactly is being proposed here, right? Why? Okay, you give the captives, right? You give back the captives that are alive, but then the other side, you don't get anything. You don't get anything. You don't even get respite for your people who have been, ethnically cleansed for 19 months. This is not a ceasefire proposal. This is simply, lay down and die. This is just like, being very transparent. We want the captives back, but then we're going to come back and kill you because
yep,
that is the terms that the Israeli leadership stands by. And remember that a poll by Penn University just 1 week ago shows 82% of the Israeli population agrees with the depopulation of Gaza. They
yes,
support it, 82%. So this is
yep,
not an issue of the government. This is an issue of Israeli society.
yeah. They keep trying to make this like this is purely about Netanyahu. This is not purely about Netanyahu. He is perfectly in alignment with what his government wants, with the exception of the hostages, which Hamas is. I mean, God, man, they are in a tough spot because if you accept the deal, you're accepting the deal. And I want to get your take on this. You're accepting the deal knowing that Israel's going to rearm, reload, and fill their ranks with their military because 40% of reservists hadn't been showing up.
Mhm.
And in a month or two, go back on a killing spree. That's assuming you even wait a month or two. I
Exactly.
mean, does anybody believe that if in 2 weeks after getting the hostages and Netanyahu goes on a killing spree again, that Trump is going to say anything about it? He's going to blame Hamas. I guarantee you.
Of course. You know, the victim is always here to blame, right?
Yeah.
The genocided, the people who are being genocided are the ones to blame for existing, I guess, right? Like this is the rhetoric. Even, you know, when you talk about Western media or certain politicians being like, I don't understand why this keeps
Yeah. I don't
happening.
get
Oh,
it.
you understand. You simply don't want to make peace with it, right? Like today you have Macron talking about, because, right, we're just a couple of weeks from this big summit at the UN in which it's expected that many nations are going to formally recognize a Palestinian state with French and Saudi sponsorship. So
That's right.
Macron talks about, you know, I saw this quote: if we abandon Gaza, we will lose all credibility.
You've already lost all
Oh,
credibility.
Emmanuel, you have no credibility anymore,
Yeah.
for a while now. So
Yeah.
let's stop pretending, you know. And but in any case, right? If just to mention quickly, this summit that is coming, right? Even if the world votes to recognize a Palestinian state, nothing's going to happen if there's no repercussions for Israel, if there's no consequences, right? You mentioned the Nuremberg trials. There need to be they need to be, you know, redone. There needs to be accountability for what's happening, and it's not just Benjamin Netanyahu. Is the entirety of the Israeli defense system, of the
Yeah.
intelligence. It's the soldiers, it's the commanders. You know, you just need to go. Like I would suggest to your audience, go on Telegram or go on X and search for the Hind Rajah Foundation. Search for the Israel Genocide Tracker channels, and here you will find just, you know, an infinite a number of evidence, of proof of what these soldiers are doing inside Gaza. And this has to be used for prosecutions down the line. International law needs to be upheld at some point, because if we don't, then what's happening in Gaza is simply not going to stay in Gaza. You know, the level of brutality, of disregard for human life, is not going to stay there. It's going to start to be exported elsewhere. And we already know that, in particular in the United States, you have a government that is more than willing to start rounding up people on the streets and sending them to a third country, you know, to work slave labor in concentration camps. You have a government that is talking about sending migrants and Palestinians, mind you, to Libya, a country that has been destroyed and where open air slave markets abound, to Rwanda, a country that is also in crisis, that has also had its own genocide, right? So, what exactly is happening? You know, ethnic cleansing is all of a sudden going to be globalized. And we're just going to be sitting on our hands, you know, looking at Emmanuel Macron, you know, wondering whether he has any credibility left.
Well, he's getting beat by his wife, so credibility has been lost a long time ago. Look, man, I agree with you. Everything that you said, Esteban, fantastic breakdown. When I saw that shadowy organization, my thought was like, okay, this is outrageous. The notion that they're trying to make a profit off of starvation,
Exactly.
and then
Exactly,
trying to
because
hide it.
remember that they get tax rebates. You know, anybody who's donating to these, you know, GHF, they can
Gets a
write it off
tax
as
rebate.
tax. Exactly, exactly. So this is not about humanitarian aid. It's about money. This is about money and land.
Esteban Carrillo, he's an Ecuadorian, for some reason, he's a Beirut-based Ecuadorian journalist, but whatever. Ecuadorian journalist, currently writing for The Cradle. The Cradle is a fantastic media organization. They are on, I often see their work on Twitter, but they also have a YouTube program now that is running, what is it, Monday and Thursday? Is
Monday
that
and
right?
Thursdays, we have our podcast called The Cradle News Roundup. Everybody go check it out.
Definitely check them out. Their stories are pulse on the news constantly over the
We
course
try.
of,
We
of
try.
the course of the day. Man, you guys are fantastic. Great job. Great work. He was previously with Tell Us Our English, another good organization. Esteban, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamal. Have a good
You have
one.
a good one. Be
You
safe.
too. Bye bye.